He returned from abroad with nothing, at least that's what they thought. The village mocked him, his father was ashamed, and everyone turned their backs. But one woman saw his heart when he had nothing to offer. This is a powerful story about character, patience, humiliation, and the kind of love money cannot buy. And a test that revealed who was real and who was not. Stay till the end because the truth will change everything. Yumak was the kind of village where stories never truly slept. They moved quietly from mouth to mouth like fine dust carried by harmattan wind. Soft, persistent, impossible to stop. In Yumak, everyone believed they knew everyone else's business. A man's name could rise by morning and fall before sunset. Life there was simple but never easy. Hope existed, yes, but it was fragile. Poverty pressed down on it. Tradition wrapped tightly around it. Most people were born, lived, and died within the same stretch of red earth, never expecting more than survival. At the center of this village stood Chief Akon Kwo Ina. He was not the richest man in Yumak, nor was he the loudest. But he was trusted. When disputes broke out, people came to him. When money needed safekeeping, his hands were chosen. When decisions had to be made, his voice carried weight. Chief Ina was a man of discipline, deeply rooted in tradition. His words were few, but when he spoke, people listened. Yet beneath his calm exterior lived a quiet restlessness, a dream that refused to let him sleep. His only son, from a young age, Chue did not move like other boys. While his mates chased goats or wrestled in the dust, he sat beside elders, listening. He watched faces. He asked questions that surprised people. "Papa," he once asked, "what is beyond the hills?" Another time, "Why do some people leave and never return?" And one night, as they sat outside under a sky filled with stars, he asked softly, "Is life only farming and struggle?" Chief Ina had no easy answers. Each time his son spoke like that, pride rose in his chest, and fear followed closely behind. Yumak was not kind to dreamers. Many had dreamed before. Most had returned broken or not returned at all. At night, when the village slept, Chief Ina lay awake beside his wife, staring at the dark ceiling of their modest home. "If I do nothing," he thought, "this boy will grow strong, hard-working, and forgotten." Then the opportunity came. A distant relative spoke of the United Kingdom, of schools, of work, of possibilities beyond imagination. The words sounded like both promise and danger. Sending his son away would cost everything. And Chief Ina paid it. He sold farmlands that had belonged to his family for generations. He borrowed money from friends who trusted his name. His wife gave up valuables inherited from her own mother. In a moment of desperate faith, he even touched community savings entrusted to him, telling himself it was temporary. "When my son succeeds," he whispered to the night, "I will return everything." But the village did not see sacrifice. They saw madness. Whispers followed him everywhere. "Ina has lost his senses. He sold his father's land for a boy. What if the UK swallows him whole?" Some laughed openly. Others shook their heads in pity. One evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Agui Fejai, one of the village elders, approached him. "Ina," the old man asked gently, "are you not afraid?" Chief Ina met his eyes. "What if your son fails?" Agui continued. "What will you have left?" For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Chief Ina straightened his shoulders. "My son will not fail," he said calmly. "I stake my name on it." It was not arrogance. It was faith. The night before Chue left, his mother packed a small bag. 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, shoes too big for his feet. She cried quietly so her son would not hear. At dawn, Chief Ina hugged his son tightly. "Remember who you are," he whispered. "Remember where you come from. And no matter how far you go, never forget people." As Chue walked away, Yumak watched in silence. Some with hope, some with doubt, some with envy. None of them knew that this departure would one day test their hearts, expose their character, and changed the village forever. The plane landed under a sky the color of old lead. Chue stepped into the cold and felt it enter him the way a question enters a quiet room. Slow, insistent, impossible to ignore. The language on the signs looked like music he had never learned. The streets were wide and indifferent. People moved around him with the kind of self-containment he had only ever seen in faces on television. He had expected difficulty. He had not expected silence. In Yumuk, faces always answered. A greeting, a nod, a long story. Here, faces slid past without recognition. That first night he slept in a single bed in a single room that everyone else called a flat. The heater coughed. The window rattled. He held his thin blanket close and pretended the cold was part of the journey, the price of a dream. Work came because hunger was a better teacher than pride. He learned to wash plates until his wrists ached. He learned the geometry of a restaurant kitchen, where the hot plates were, how steam moved, where the knives hid their sting. Hands that had once been used to planting became hands that handled knives, pans, metal trays. He learned that the English of kitchen noise was different from the English of books. It was short, sharp, full of orders and curses and laughter. When the restaurants closed, he cleaned office buildings. He learned to move through sleek spaces, glass and lacquer, and the kind of neatness his village had never known. There were nights when he scrubbed toilets in an empty skyscraper while the city slept, and he felt both invisible and necessary. The work aided him, but slowly it gave him something else. Discipline. He read at night by the light of a cracked lamp. Simple books at first, brochures, leaflets, the little instructional pages that came with appliances. Then newspapers. Then trade magazines. He learned the names of tools, the names of concrete mixes, and the secret strengths in different mortars. He learned to measure without guessing. He began to see patterns. How things were built, how deals were made, how a reputation could be assembled out of competence and punctuality. There were humiliations stacked like winter wood. On cold mornings, men on buses would step over him as if he were a stain. Some employers murmured the words temporary, as if that were a life sentence. Once, when he asked for wages he had earned, the manager laughed and offered him a cigarette instead of an answer. There were days when the loneliness on his bed felt louder than any engine. And yet people noticed the small things. The man who arrived on time, who never left a job half done, who returned broken tools repaired and labeled. A foreman named Malik, gruff, older, with a face like worn leather, saw him on a rain-soaked morning and did something simple. Malik gave him extra hours. Not a charity, no sermon, just work. A good hand, Malik said once, lighting his pipe. A good hand makes the rest easier. With more hours came more money. With more money came choices, and Chue learned to choose like a fisherman mending nets, patiently with an eye for holes. He sent small sums back home, first to keep what little dignity remained in his family, later to rebuild a patched roof, later still to pay a child's school fee. He did it quietly. He never wanted the sending to be a spectacle. The money was a presence, a tether for his father's trust, a promise kept in silence. Opportunities built themselves from patience. Malik introduced him to a small construction crew needing dependable laborers. Chue showed up before sunrise and stayed after sunset. He asked questions in the way children do. Not to challenge, but to understand. He learned brick bonding patterns, how to read a blueprint's whisper, how to listen to the mortar when it was drying too quickly. He learned to mix concrete with the kind of care that respected weather and weight. Once, during a winter that threatened to freeze bones rather than water, a scaffold collapsed on a job site. Nobody was badly hurt, but tools were lost, schedules shredded. Chue stayed and sorted through the debris until the foreman's temper softened. He did not seek praise, he sought order. When the foreman, himself a man who had never met too many gentle hands, finally nodded, Chue felt a small, unfussy pride. It sat in his chest like a seed under soil. By the third year he had learned the trade, and the trade had begun to teach him another lesson: leverage. He noticed contracts signed by men who never touched a trowel, He noticed where waste and carelessness fed profit. He noticed how a few good decisions could accumulate into a comfortable life. He saved deliberately. He opened a tiny account, a secret. He watched the numbers grow with the same reverence he had once watched the harvest. He failed sometimes. He invested in a tiny joint venture with an acquaintance who vanished with the materials. He trusted a paperwork promise that turned out to be ink on thin paper. When these things happened, he did not crumble. He analyzed. He made lists. He learned particulars of law and registration and how to keep receipts. Every mistake became a lecture he read to himself until the lesson stayed. Because he had been taught to be patient, he was also taught to be prudent. He did not take fancy clothes or flashy things. He ate simply, slept simply, and made his pleasures small. A hot tea on a bitter morning, a book purchased with careful thought, a postcard sent to his mother with a few honest lines. These small economies were investments in a far-off day. When enough years had passed that he could breathe without counting pennies, Chue sent more than small sums. He funded the rebuilding of his family house in Yumuk. Bricks lifted one by one, a roof replaced, a room added for the elders. He sent money to pay for children's tuition and to fix a dried well. All of it was done quietly, anonymously at first, later with a kind of modest acknowledgement that always embarrassed his father. Success, when it came, was not sudden. It resembled a slow migration. A contract here, a partnership there, a reputation for finishing what others left undone. He started a tiny company with a partner who respected him, someone who had seen him work through storms and knew the price of reliability. They took on small municipal jobs, then slightly larger ones. They hired 2 lads who remembered what it was to be hungry. They paid them on time. Business grew. He wore the new success like a second skin, useful, unostentatious. He learned to sign his name with a steady hand and to receive compliments without flinching. But he also learned something else. The currency of attention. With money came requests. Requests that curried favor, requests that tried to purchase past loyalties. He watched how easily expectation became entitlement. One evening, sitting alone in a refurbished flat that smelled faintly of lemon and timber, Chue went through the old letters from his father. His father's handwriting trembled in places. In others it was steady, the way a man who must always be firm becomes. Chief Ina's last note before Chue's successful years read less like instruction and more like a bench to sit on. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from. That sentence arrived now as both a blessing and a problem. He had done what he promised. He had not only survived, he had built, but he had also watched how the village's hope for him had become a weight on his family and on himself. He had heard the stories of sons returned and carried on palanquins of expectation. He had watched how quick the world could be to rebrand a man with a single image. What he wanted now was a truth that could not be bought. He wanted to know whether love and respect in Yumuk were for the man he had become or for the money he could give. He wanted to know which friends were friends of him and which were friends of what he could do to make their lives easier. He wanted to see faces not gilded by prospect but honest in the dust. So he made a plan that surprised even himself. Not to flaunt his wealth. Not to return as a crowned son and silence the village with gifts. Instead, because his faith in people had been tested by distance and hardship, he decided on a different experiment. He would come home quietly. He would carry no suitcases worth boasting. He would let Yumuk meet the man he had been when all they saw was a bus ticket and some dust. He would see who loved him when there was nothing to offer. On the night he booked his ticket, he folded a single brown envelope and placed inside the proofs of his life. Documents, a few photos, deeds he would not yet show. He did not tell Malik. He did not tell his partner. He told only himself, like one who whispers a vow into a pillow. There was a hollow feeling and a deep relief at once, as if a ledger had been closed and a different book opened. In the small space between engines and sleep, between the city's neon and the quiet of the road that would take him north, Chue understood something simple. Success had been a road, but humility had been the compass. He had earned the right to return not as a triumph, but as a choice. And so he went to bed that night with a single bus ticket in his pocket and the knowledge that, somewhere under the stars, a village still kept its stories, waiting to discover whether theirs would be a story of loyalty or a story of dust. The road into Yumak had not changed. It was still narrow and uneven, still bordered by dry grass and stubborn trees that bent but never broke. The same red dust rose behind the bus as it groaned forward, settling slowly on everything it touched. To Chue, that dust felt familiar, almost welcoming, smelled like memory. He sat by the window, quiet, his small travel bag resting at his feet. No one on the bus knew who he was. To them, he was just another tired traveler returning home with nothing to show. That was exactly how he wanted it. As the bus slowed near the village square, his heart beat steadily, not with excitement but with resolve. This was not a moment for celebration. This was a moment for truth. The bus stopped with a tired hiss. Kay stepped down. For a second no one noticed him. Then someone did. Is that Chue? The name moved through the air like a question. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. The crowd gathered slowly, curiosity leading before recognition. They saw the worn slippers, the faded clothes, the dust clinging to him like a second skin. Whispers followed immediately. Is this the one from the UK? So this is how he came back. All those years, and this is it. Laughter rose, not loud at first but uncertain, testing the ground. Then it grew bolder. Chue stood calmly, his face unreadable. He had imagined this moment. He had prepared for it. Still, something in his chest tightened. Not pain, disappointment. Chief Akon Kwo Ina pushed his way through the crowd. He stopped when he saw his son. The pride that had lived in his posture froze and cracked. This was not the picture he had painted for the village. This was not the son he had spoken of with such confidence. Chue, he said almost to himself. Chue bowed his head slightly in respect. I have come home, Papa. The village fell quiet, waiting for an explanation that never came. Finally Chue spoke again. His voice was calm, steady, carrying no anger. I did not come as a rich man, he said. I came to see who still knows me without money. The words landed heavily. No drums sounded. No songs were sung. The celebration that had been planned quietly dissolved into confusion. That evening the village talked. They talked in the market. They talked at the wells. They talked in low voices behind closed doors. Some were embarrassed. Some were angry. Some felt cheated. The chief deceived us, one man said. All those promises, another replied, shaking her head. The UK has humbled him, someone laughed. Life quickly became uncomfortable for Chue. At the market, sellers pretended not to hear him. At the well, people went silent when he approached. Children whispered and pointed, copying the way his slippers dragged against the ground. Chue endured it quietly. He stayed in a small, neglected room at the edge of the village. The roof leaked. The mat was thin. At night, he lay awake listening to insects and distant voices, feeling the weight of the test he had chosen. One afternoon, hungry and tired, he went to the market with a few coins in his hand. I will pay later, he said gently. Please. A crowd gathered. Laughter followed. This is what the UK brings, someone mocked. Go and beg somewhere else, another said. Then, without warning, a bucket of water was poured over him. Leave here, a man shouted. You bring shame. The water soaked his clothes. The laughter grew louder. He stood still. He did not shout. He did not insult anyone. He did not defend himself. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. Then a voice cut through the noise. Stop it! A young woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her wrapper was simple. Her face was calm. There was no anger in her voice, only firmness. She placed money on the table and gathered the food Chue had tried to buy. This is paid for, she said. The crowd murmured. She turned to Chue and met his eyes. You helped my cousin years ago, she said quietly. You paid her school fees when no one else would. You pause. I never forgot. Chue lowered his head, overwhelmed, not by shame but by gratitude. In the middle of mockery and rejection, one person had remembered his kindness. The village did not know it yet, but something important had just happened. The test had begun to reveal its answer. And this time the truth stood quietly, without money, without applause, and without fear. Adais did not return to the market that day to argue or explain herself. She walked away as she had arrived, without drama, without pride, without looking back to see who watched. In Yumak that kind of courage was rare. Loud strength was praised. Quiet strength was misunderstood. That evening, as the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the village paths, she came to the small room where Chue stayed. She knocked softly. When Chue opened the door and saw her, surprise crossed his face. You don't have to do this, he said gently. I know, she replied. That's why I came. She entered and placed a small bowl of food on the floor. The room was bare, cracked walls, a thin mat, a single stool. She did not look around with pity. She did not sigh. She simply sat. They ate in silence at first. Not an awkward silence, but a respectful one, the kind that allows wounds to breathe. After a while she spoke. You didn't change, she said. Chue looked at her, unsure. People think you did, she continued. But I remember who you were. Her words settled gently in him. From that day, Adais became a steady presence in his life. She came early in the mornings before the village woke. Sometimes she came in the evenings, when whispers softened and judgment slept. She brought food when she could. When she could not, she brought water. And when she had nothing to bring, she brought herself. She sat with him. She listened. When Chue spoke of hunger, she listened. When he spoke of loneliness, she listened. When he spoke of pain without giving it a name, she listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer empty comfort. She did not ask for explanations. Slowly, carefully, Chue began to speak more freely. He told her about the cold nights abroad, about working until his hands cracked, about learning to survive without being seen. He spoke of expectations that felt heavier than chains, and of the fear of disappointing the one man who had believed in him without question. Adais listened with eyes that held understanding, not judgment. You didn't deserve what happened at the market, she said one night. I know, Chue replied quietly. But I needed to see it. They began to laugh sometimes. Soft laughter, careful laughter, about childhood memories and small village stories. In those moments, Yumak felt far away. There were no rumors, no tests, no cruelty. Just two people sharing warmth in a cold place. People noticed. Why is she always with him? Women whispered. She could do better. Is she blind to his shame?